going on, everybody? Johnny B here with Devslopes.com, and in this video we are going to get to some cool stuff. We are going to create some power-ups for our game. And so, you know, we're running around, we're getting hit, and we're trying to get to level 20, but it might be pretty tough without some upgrades. Okay, so we're going to make in this video 2 power-ups, one for health and one for speed. Okay, so let's get cracking. First thing I'm going to do is here we're just going to create our power up first in the scene. Then we're going to turn it into a prefab. Then we're going to modify our game manager to manage where and how many of the upgrades to spawn. Okay, so let's get going. Here in the hierarchy, I'm going to right click and say create empty. And that just threw it in to the ranger for some reason, so I'm going to drag it out. And we're going to call this health power up. All right. So what do our power ups need? We're going to need a picture. We're going to need a way for our player to come into contact with it. So we're going to throw on a rigid body and a sphere collider. And then we're going to need a script that controls the actions of it. So let's go through those. We're going to add a component. I'm going to add a sphere collider. And I'm going to raise this up a little bit. It is going to be a trigger. So we're going to say is trigger. Then we're going to say add component. We're going to add a rigid body. We're not going to use gravity. Everything else is fine. Then we are going to add a sprite renderer. Okay. And for our sprite, you can choose the circle select and choose our game heart. Hey, so there we go. Looking spiffy. All right, so there is our health power up. So that looks good. All right, so what do we want to happen when our player comes into contact with our health power up? Obviously, we want to increase our health by a certain amount. So what we're going to do is we're going to call a function that we're going to put inside of the player health script that will be called from the health power up when it is intersected. So I think first thing we want to do is create our script in the health power up. So with our health power up selected, I'm going to add component and say new script, and we're going to call this health power up. I'm going to say create and add, and we're going to open that up. I'm going to pull that over here, increase our font size. So what do we need to have happen in our health power up script? We need to know when our player comes into contact with it. So first thing we're going to need is we're going to create a reference to our players. We're going to say private game object called player. And then we are also going to need access to our player health script. So I'm going to say private player health, call it player health. And in start, we are going to say player is equal to, and we're just going to grab our reference inside of our game manager .instance.player. Okay. And for our player health script, which is where we're going to have that public function, but we haven't written it yet, but we're going to just set it up. We're going to say player health is equal to player.get component, and the component we are grabbing is the player health script. Okay, that looks good, and we don't need anything on update, so we can delete that. So now we are going to write the function for when the player comes into contact with our power up. So that's going to be an on trigger event. So we're going to say void on trigger enter, and that takes a collider, which we'll call other. And we only want this to occur when the player comes into contact with it. So we're going to do a check. We're going to say if other dot game object is the player, then we are going to call the function that resides inside the player health script, and that function we are going to call powerup health. And then once that occurs, we are going to destroy the game object, so that once we run through it, oops, spelled this wrong. So once we run through it, it removes itself from the game. All right, so that looks good. I'm gonna save that. And then we need to open up our player health script and make some modifications here. So we don't want to simply modify this class's private variables, right? We need to be good little coders and have our data encapsulated. So we're going to create a getter and setter for our current health variable. Okay, so that looks like this. We're going to say public int current health with a capital C, because this is our getter and setter. So we're going to say get return lowercase current health. Then our set, we can say set, and we're just going to do some checks for logic. So we're going to say if the value that is trying to be set is less than 0, we don't want that. So we're just going to say current health is equal to 0, else current health is equal to the value that is trying to be set. Okay. All right, so now we have our getter and setter for our current health. Now we can create our public functions. We're going to scroll down here to the bottom. And what we're going to have this function do is simply increment our current health by a certain amount. Okay, so we called that function, we said public void, and we called it powerup health inside of our health powerup script. And what we're going to do is, so I think the amount that we want to add, we'll give it 30, okay? And so, but we only want to be able to have a max of 100, right? So if we're only at 80 and we pick up the powerup health, and it would try to put us up to 120. So we need to have a check in there. We need to have some checks. So we're going to say if the current health is less than or equal to 70, so 100 minus the powerup value, then current health. And so here you see we're using our setter, so current health plus equal 30. So if we're at or below 70, then we'll give the full powerup strength of 30. Else if current health is less than the starting health, then current health is equal to starting health. So if we're below the starting health, even if it's by 5 or 10, then we'll just set it right back to starting health. But if we're at or below 70, then we provide the full amount. All right, so that looks good. And then we just need to update our health slider. So health slider dot value is equal to current health. Great. So I'm going to save that. Health power up script looks good. So I'm going to save that, and let's come back to our Unity editor, and let's press, well, let's check out, make sure we got this set. Health, I think we're ready to go. So let's press play. And let's find us an enemy to take some damage. All right, so down 10, down 20, down 30. So I'm going to pick this up, and it should set us back to full health. Hey, and there we go. Our full health is restored. All right, so I'm going to stop this, and replay it, and just to do the check to make sure we don't go above 100. So I'm going to get hit just once. Then I'm going to come down here and grab our health, and we went up back to 100. Alright, so that is working beautifully. Great. So we have our 1 health power up here in our scene, but we want to be able to make it so that the game manager is able to spawn our power-ups in different locations, in different time intervals. So we're going to make this a prefab. So with the health power-up selected, I'm going to drag it into our prefabs folder, and now we have it as a prefab. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just delete it from our scene and save, and let's get our game manager to be the one that manages how and when and where to spawn our power-ups. But the first thing we got to do is make some power-up spawn locations. So here in the hierarchy, I'm going to create a new empty object. I'm going to rename it power-up spawns. I'm going to set its position to 0, 0, 0. And then I'm going to create inside of it an empty object, and I'm going to call this power spawn. And just like we did with our enemy spawns, I'm going to turn it into a icon, and I'm going to choose, we did green for the orcs, so let's do red for the power-ups. So that looks good, selected. And let's see, where are you at? Holding F. Okay, we're over here. So I'm going to come up here, and I think we'll have maybe 5 or 6 of these. Let's do 6 spawn locations. I'm going to say Apple D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Rename them each to power spawn. Very good. And now I'm just going to randomly place them around the map. You can do the same. I'm going to put one over here, one over here, one up over here, and I already moved that one. Okay, I think we have 2 somewhere still. We got one there and one there. Okay, so, and you maybe up over here. All right, I think that looks fine. And then for with the parent group, I'm going to actually move it up to Y in the 1, just to raise them up a little bit off of the ground, and so that they'll be more at eye level with our player. All right, so that looks good. So now we have all of our power spawn locations. Let's save that, and now let's jump into our game manager. So I'm going to open the game manager script, and what do we need to add? We need to add a game object array like we did with our enemy spawn points. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to copy this actually, game object, and these, what do we want to call these? Let's call these power up spawns. Power up spawns. That looks good. And so what else do we need? Let's do a couple more serialized objects, and these are going to contain our references to our health power up and our speed power up. Okay, that looks good. And I think we'll limit how many power-ups you can get per game. So let's just say, let's make this serialized as well. Serialized, this is going to be an int. That way you'll be able to change it in the Unity editor in case, you know, we put too many or too few, depending on how it looks in our gameplay. And we're going to call that max power ups is equal to 4. Okay, so that's the maximum number of power ups that we're going to allow per game. And we can modify that as we play it and see how it feels. All right, so that's looking good. What else do we need? Just like we had a generated spawn time and current spawn time for our enemies, we are also going to need that for our power-ups. We're going to say power up spawn time. And let's set that, well, since we're going to be testing it out a lot, let's make it a smaller number. Then we'll want to make it a bigger number as we actually put it into real gameplay. But we'll start that out at 5. And I think then we need a timer to keep track of it. I'm going to say private float current power up spawn time. And we're going to initialize that to 0. All right, so that looks good. And then to be able to keep track of how many power-ups we've spawned, since we have a max number, we need to have some way of keeping track of that number. So we're going to say private, and this is going to be an integer, and we're going to call this simply power-ups. Okay. And we're going to initialize that to 0. All right, that looks good. And very good, very good. So we need a way of when a power-up is spawned to increase this number by 1. So I think just like we did with our register enemy, killed enemy, we're going to create a little register power-up function here. So we're going to say public void register power up, and we don't need it to take any parameters, and all we're going to do is say power-ups plus. So we're just going to increase the number of power-ups by 1. Okay, so that looks good. And then to make this work, we're going to come back to our health power-up, and on start we are going to say game manager.instance register power-up. Great. So now each time a power-up is spawned, it will register itself in this integer, and we can use that to keep track of how many have been spawned in the game. All right, so that's looking good. Next up, I think we can get going with the rest of our code. In update, we need to keep track of the time. So I'm going to say current power-up spawn time plus equal time dot delta time, just like we did with our enemies spawn time. And now we can create our coroutine. So just like we created our coroutine for the spawn functionality, we are going to do the same with our power-ups. So I'm going to come down here to the bottom and just create a new one. So I'm going to say IE numerator, and we're going to call this power-up spawn. So just like we did with our enemy spawn, I want you to go ahead and take a crack at it. You already have all of this enemy spawn code to be your guide, so go ahead and give it a try. Pretty much the same thing. We're going to do a check to see if enough time has elapsed since the last power-up spawn. If it has, then we are going to reset the current power-up spawn time to 0. Then we're going to do a check to see if the number of power-ups is less than the maximum number of power-ups. Then we are going to create a random number for our game object to spawn a health power-up or a speed power-up based on the random number generated. And we won't need anything like this afterwards. So go ahead and take a crack at it, see if you can do it. So I hope you have done that, and if not, if you got stuck, we're going to go through it together right now. So I'm going to say if the current power-up spawn time is greater than the power-up spawn time, so if enough time has elapsed since the last power-up spawn, and if the power-ups is less than the max power-ups. But I forgot one thing. If the current spawn time is if that passes, then we're going to say current power up spawn time, and we're going to reset that back to 0. Okay, so that's what we want to do there. And so now that we know that we are able to spawn a power-up, since our power-ups has not reached the maximum number, we are going to say we're going to create a random number that will determine where our power-up is spawned. So we're going to say int random number is equal to random dot range, and the range that we're going to pass in is 0 to power up spawns dot length -1. So then we are going to assign a spawn location to that random number. We're going to say game object spawn location is equal to power up spawns, and that is going to be the random number that we just created. Okay, now we need a random number to select our power-up. So we're going to say int random power up is equal to random dot range between 0 and 2. So just to clarify, this is minimum and maximum, but it's a little bit misleading because the minimum is inclusive and the maximum is exclusive. So really the only options here are 0 and 1. With the enemies spawns, the options were 0, 1, and 2. So it's a little bit misleading when you see 0 and 3, and the minimum is inclusive, but the maximum is exclusive, but that's just the way it is. All right, so now we're going to say if random power-up is equal to 0, then our new power-up, which we have not created yet. So I'm just gonna copy this, and so we need a variable for the new power-up. So we're gonna come up here and we're gonna say private game object, and we're going to call that new power-up. Let's save that and come back down here. Okay, so new power-up, new power up. New power-up is equal to, and we're going to instantiate a new game object, and the game object that we're going to instantiate is health power-up, and that comes from above where we created a serialized object, and in a minute we're going to drag in our prefab into that serialized slot, and that is going to be cast as a game object. Else, if our random power-up is actually 1, then we are going to say new power-up is equal to instantiate, and this one is going to be a speed power-up, which we haven't created yet. So we're actually, just to test this code out, we're actually going to drag the health power-up into both slots. But after we get this up and going and everything, then we'll create our second speed power-up. And this is going to be cast as a game object. That looks good. Now to set the position, we're going to say new power-up dot transform dot position is equal to our spawn location dot transform dot position. All right, that looks good. And then we are going to just say yield return null, and we are going to start this coroutine. This is again going to be a recursive coroutine. I'm going to save it, and I think that should take care of it. So just to run through what we did again, we created a game object array of power-up spawns. These are the locations. We created slots for our health power-up and speed power-up. We created our variables to keep track of the time and how many we have. We created a register power-up function that is called from our power-up on start. And then if the conditions are correct for the power-up spawn coroutine to run, which is if it has been longer than a specified amount of time since the last power-up spawn. And if we have not reached the max number of power-ups, then we are going to choose a random spawn location. We're going to choose a random power-up, and depending on which power-up is chosen, we instantiate that object at the location of our spawn location. And then we start the coroutine. And we need this also in start. So I'm going to come up here to start, and under the enemy spawn coroutine, I'm going to say start coroutine, and this is called power up spawn, I believe. Is that what we called it? Let's see here. Yep, power up spawn. All right, cool. So I'm going to save that, and let's come back to our Unity editor and throw in our spawn points for our power-ups. So we have now here in our game manager script, we have an array that is a drop-down, and our size is 6. We have 6 power spawn locations, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah. So we're just going to drag those in one at a time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, so I'm going to save that, and let's I think everything else is good. Oh, we got to drag in our power-ups. So like I said, we're just going to drag in our health power-up for both of the health power-up and the speed power-up. So with that done, I'm going to save and press play. Let's we said 5 seconds, so let's see if, oh, there's a heart, it just popped up. So I'm gonna let him hit me so we can come and fill back up. Nice, filling back up. Let's keep wandering around, see if we can find something else. Hey, here's another heart. I'm gonna go pick it up, but we're already full. Let's keep wandering around. Let's see here, any more? So we should keep getting hearts until we've reached 4. And I think that was what we said as our max number. It's also possible, actually, let me, you know what, I'll bet that more than one spawned at the, at these locations, actually. So with our console, let's not maximize on play, and let's do it this way so that we can actually see the power-ups here in the hierarchy. All right, so there's one health power-up, another health power-up, ouch, 3 health power-ups as we can see here, and 4 health power-ups. Yeah, so I think what happened last time was that we had multiple spawning on the same location. So that's why we weren't able to see 4 show up. So we got 3 showing, so 2 in one of these locations, which is fine. All right, so that looks fantastic. And I think we'll actually stop this video right here, and in the next video we will work on our speed power-up. All right, so we will see you in the next one.